the House Order of June 23, 2022, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. With regard to interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function, and the clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. Please also note during the meeting it is not permitted to take pictures in the room or screenshots on Zoom. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses appearing by video conference, I am informing the committee that both witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me and we will make proper corrections. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 2022, the committee is resuming its study of potential trade impacts of the United States Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 on certain firms and workers in Canada. We have with us as an individual Colin Robertson, Senior Advisor and Fellow for the Canadian Global Affairs Institute by video conference, and from the Bioindustrial Innovation Canada, A.J. Marshall, Advisor and Project Manager by video conference, Canadian Biogas Association, Jennifer Green, Executive Director, and the Cement Association of Canada, Adam Orr, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to all of you. We will start with opening remarks of up to 5 minutes. And Mr. Robertson, would you please go forward?
Thank you, Chair. In the fall of 2005, I was leading our advocacy team at our Washington Embassy. Softwood lumber was a top priority. Our ambassador, Frank McKenna, asked me when our troubles over lumber began. I called the Librarian of Congress, and a couple of days later, he said the research showed that timber merchants in northern Massachusetts, what is now Maine, had successfully petitioned Congress during the second administration of George Washington to impose levies, tariffs as we call them today, on New Brunswick timber sent to Boston to be used in shipbuilding. The point of this story is to remind ourselves that Americans practicing protectionism is as old as the Republic, and it will never change. We're not usually the primary target of U.S. trade actions. A lot in the Inflation Reduction Act is aimed at countering China. But the deeply integrated nature of our trade means that we become collateral damage, as with the Trump administration's steel and aluminum tariffs. Trade policy is even more complicated because it now involves climate, human rights, labor, and environmental provisions. And in the wake of the pandemic and the return of great power competition, national security is a dominant consideration. We must now secure and make resilient our supply chains through decoupling, nearshoring, and friendshoring. Security of supply now trumps comparative advantage. We witness the return of national industrial policies, complete with incentives and subsidies, like those in the IRA. For this reason, and this is my second point, our advocacy efforts with the United States must be a permanent, ongoing campaign, reminding Americans that reciprocity in trade and investment continues to benefit both nations. The U.S. is the market that matters most for all business, especially for those we are encouraging, like women and minorities. 3/4 of our exports, manufactured goods like auto parts, or resources like lumber, oil, and gas, go to the United States. And with trade generating over 60% of our economy, access to the United States matters. For 30 or so more American states, their biggest market is Canada. Our trade and investment generates 9 million American jobs. Parsing this by state and by congressional and legislative district, as I used to do, works because just as all politics in the United States is local, so is all trade. Other witnesses have testified how a Team Canada effort helped us secure a level playing field for the production of electric vehicles. Our ambassador, embassy, and consulates play a critical role. Having done this both in Washington and at consulates, our success also depends on a Team Canada effort involving the Prime Minister, Premiers, Ministers, and members of Parliament from all parties. All levels of government must be involved, as well as business, labor, and interest groups. To level the playing field on U.S. protectionism, we pursue various avenues. We will continue to protest their incentives on battery production as discriminatory and contrary to their CUSMA and WTO trade obligations, arguing, as we did in the state of the EV tax credit, that we should approach this on a continental basis. We will remind the United States of our right to respond to discriminatory behavior with trade sanctions. The threat of targeted sanctions helped persuade the United States to lift the steel and aluminum tariffs. But imposing counter tariffs is also imposing a tax on our own consumers. As this committee knows, there is pressure to match the American subsidies with subsidies of our own. We have done this before, but the cost is borne by the taxpayer. Alternatively, we could agree with the United States on the use of incentives, as we did recently on solar panels. The ideal would be a continental industrial strategy, including Mexico. Regardless, and this is my third point, we need to get our own act together by making the sectors that matter most to us as competitive as possible. There is lots of useful research from business, government, and think tanks to draw on. Two stand out: Restart, Recover, and Reimagine Prosperity for All Canadians, prepared by Canada's Industry Strategy Council, and the Senate Prosperity Action Group report, Rising to the Challenge of New Global Realities. To help implement and make practical their recommendations, we should reconstitute the sectoral advisory groups, or SAGITs, which served us so well during the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement negotiations. Composed of business, labor, provincial government, and civil society, they guided the negotiators with practical advice on what Canada needed, acting as sounding boards on what we could accept in the negotiations. To conclude, advancing our interests with the United States is a permanent campaign requiring a Team Canada approach with a clear focus on our objectives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robertson. Mr. Marshall, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the committee for the invitation to speak today. My name is Sandy Marshall. I'm an advisor and project manager with Bioindustrial Innovation Canada, also known as BIC. BIC is a national not-for-profit business accelerator that provides critical strategic investment, advice, and services to developers of clean, green, and sustainable technologies. We have a track record of successfully supporting early-stage companies across the country in multiple sectors. For example, some of our portfolio companies include lithium-ion battery recovery companies, to renewable fuel producers working to decarbonize our transportation sector by creating sustainable aviation fuel. We have a history of success. Our portfolio companies are on track to achieve over 13 megaton of GHG reductions by 2030, while at the same time supporting thousands of jobs. Simply put, BIC knows and understands the clean, green, and sustainable technology space and the opportunities that Canada has to become a leader and create thousands of good-paying jobs at home. The introduction of the Inflation Reduction Act by the US poses a threat to this industry in Canada. Even prior to the ERA, many early-stage companies have had to make the tough decisions on where to grow their business at home or south of the border. The IRA will help make that decision just a bit easier for many of these companies. The massive subsidies being provided, such as the investment tax credit of up to 50% and production credits for clean fuels, including for sustainable aviation fuel, as mentioned, means that there is an even larger reason for Canadian companies to shift their interests abroad and gain access to these incentives and a significantly larger market and workforce. The case of sustainable aviation fuel production is particularly telling. For every liter produced in the US under the IRA, 62 cents Canadian are provided as a tax credit on a direct pay basis. So if Canada is serious about decarbonizing aviation and serious about having the green jobs associated with this decarbonization in Canada, a production tax credit equivalent to the 62 cents per liter of the IRA should be included. Lacking a stronger response from the Canadian government, the reality is that it will be next to impossible to grow sustainable projects here in Canada. Beyond matching or succeeding available opportunities that the US government introduced, our government should also look at other complementary measures, such as supporting organizations like BSU, who can help bridge the gap and provide strategic technical support to early stage companies to provide Canada with a chance to attract and retain globally significant green projects. It should also be highlighted that the IRA builds on a number of other programs, including the Climate Smart Commodities Program, that helps to identify, validate, and provide technical, financial, and market assistance to primary producers and processors, BIC, which is BIC's primary focus, who will be the foundational stakeholders in the U.S. decarbonization strategy, as well as suppliers of primary inputs into these IRA-funded technologies. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and I'm happy to take the committee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. On to Ms. Green, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the rest of the International Trade Committee for the opportunity to join you here on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people to discuss the impact that the American Inflation Reduction Act has on Canada's biogas and renewable natural gas sector. For the purpose of my testimony, I will be referring to the Inflation Reduction Act as the IRA and renewable natural gas as RNG. The Canadian Biogas Association serves as the collective voice of Canada's biogas and RNG industry. Founded in 2008, the Canadian Biogas Association has over 180 member companies representing farmers, municipalities, utilities, technology developers, consultants, finance and insurance firms, and affiliate organizations, all with a focus on building the biogas and RNG sector in Canada. For those of you who may not be familiar with biogas and RNG, our product is a drop-in gaseous fuel that is lowering the emissions of Canada's energy system today. With over 300 projects providing low-carbon energy in every province, we call biogas and RNG a drop-in fuel because both are a form of methane, just like natural gas. The major difference is that the methane produced by our members come from organic materials from farms and municipalities rather than drilling into the ground. This difference in methane source translates to a significant drop in greenhouse gas emissions associated with its production. As you know, the IRA has upended the investment landscape for the clean energy and clean technology sectors, bringing in generous production and investment tax credits as a means of kickstarting the American domestic industry. As this committee has heard throughout its study, these measures have made Canada an uncompetitive investment jurisdiction overnight, especially in the biogas and RNG sector. As my American counterpart recently stated, the IRA, quote, gives developers and financiers certainty and a competitive edge that will fuel growth of the biogas and clean energy industry for years to come, unquote. To put it mildly, these new American tax credits have placed biogas and RNG projects in Canada, which were days away from their final investment decisions in August, permanently on hold. Canada must respond or continue to see projects that hold immediate emission reductions be paused and or go south of the border where proponents can choose between a production tax credit worth 2.6 cents US per kilowatt hour or an investment tax credit worth 30% of their project costs. We recognize that Canada has started to lay the foundation of a robust response to the IRA's threat to our competitiveness. The Canadian Biogas Association strongly supports the investment tax credits for clean technologies and hydrogen that were introduced in Fall Economic Statement 2022. These investment tax credits will help projects get built and bolster domestic clean energy security. However, there is a crack in the foundation. Finance Canada did not include provisions for biogas and RNG in the Fall Economic Statement's new investment clean technologies tax credits. We know that the federal government is investing in the long-term decarbonization of the economy with hydrogen and other clean technologies. But leaving out a technology that is decarbonizing the gas Canadians heat their homes with every day is a major oversight. I have heard from my members that if biogas and RNG projects were included in Canada's new clean technology and hydrogen investment tax credits, they would be able to execute 80% of their projects. However, without inclusion in Canada's response to the IRA, they have made it clear that it is unlikely any new biogas or RNG projects will be built in Canada, not when they can receive favorable tax treatments in the U.S. Our recommendation is an easy fix for Canada. Add biogas and RNG projects to the investment tax credit, brought in by the Fall Economic Statement and ensure that all low-carbon gaseous fuels are treated equally. This will put Canadian biogas and RNG projects on equal footing when it comes to competing for investment capital and will help my members build projects, create jobs, and reduce emissions with a proven technology. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. Mr. Auer, for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me here today on behalf of the cement and concrete industry to discuss the impact of the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. First, a few facts about my industry. Concrete is the world's most used and most important building material. It is the foundation of economic growth and infrastructure in communities large and small, providing a cost-effective, reliable solution to building durable roads, bridges, water mains, sidewalks, schools, hospitals, community centers, and the list goes on. Our industry generates more than $76 billion in annual economic activity and employs over 158,000 Canadians in good-paying jobs in communities across Canada. But making the cement that holds concrete together produces a lot of carbon pollution, about 1.5% of total emissions in Canada and 7% globally. For our industry, the scientific and the economic imperative is clear. We need to transform our industry for the net zero future. That's why we were the first industry to join Canada's Net Zero Challenge, committing to full transparency on how we plan to meet our targets. But we can't do it alone. Last month, we released a roadmap to net zero concrete in collaboration with the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, a first-in-kind collaboration with the goal to avoid 15 megatons of carbon emissions by 2030, and to map the combination of technologies, fiscal incentives, and regulatory and policy frameworks needed to decarbonize heavy industry. We've already made significant progress, and there are still some low-hanging fruit remaining to be harvested. But with approximately 60% of our emissions resulting from the immutable chemistry of making cement, deep investment in innovative and expensive technologies like carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS, are unavoidable if we are to achieve net zero. Canada is already a leader in CCUS technologies, and the cement sector is at the heart of much of that investment. But the barriers to commercialization remain daunting. To give you an idea of the magnitude, for the capital needed to build a carbon capture plant in Canada or the U.S., a company could build 2 new cement facilities in China. Simply put, building a capture plant is greater than the value of the cement facility itself. Recognizing market barriers to CCUS, governments around the world have entered the race to commercialize the technology and reap the benefits of emissions reductions and improved economic competitiveness for industry through the low-carbon transition. While Canada is off to a good start with the Net Zero Accelerator Fund and the proposed investment tax credit for CCUS, the enactment of the Inflation Reduction Act means the U.S. has rapidly sprung ahead in the race. The IRA introduces more than $369 billion in incentives for clean energy and climate-related program spending, including funding to encourage CCUS projects. It creates a significant risk that companies who want to invest in emissions-reducing technology in Canada are at a competitive disadvantage vis-à-vis their U.S. counterparts. In addition to the significantly larger funding amounts offered under the IRA, one of the biggest gaps it fills is the production value gap. It provides a predictable return on investment by paying producers for each ton of CO2 sequestered. In comparison, Canada's efforts have focused only on upfront capital subsidies, leaving investors exposed to unpalatable operational risks in an environment where, despite the carbon tax, the production value of captured carbon remains entirely unpredictable. In other words, investors in U.S. projects can now calculate with confidence what the long-term ROI on a CCUS project will be, making Canadian investments significantly riskier in comparison. Cement companies, like many industries in Canada, are part of large multinationals, and Canadian divisions must compete within their companies for projects. Canada has been successful as a destination of choice for internal allocation of capital to CCUS projects, and in fact is home to 2 of the most advanced full-scale CCUS projects in our sector, one in Edmonton and the other in the Bow Valley region of Alberta. But if Canada wants to remain competitive, capital supports must be paired with well-designed market surety mechanisms such as carbon contracts for difference as proposed in the Fall Economic Statement. We welcome the federal government's commitment to seizing the opportunities provided by a net zero economy, but thoughtful and well-designed implementation of these incentives will be needed for Canada to remain a first choice for the trillions in private capital waiting to be invested in clean technologies around the world. Budget 2023 is our next opportunity to course correct and provide Canadians with the economic and environmental benefits from the low-carbon transition. The opportunity is within our reach. We need to take it, and quickly. Thank you.
Okay, we will go on to the members. Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You know, throughout this study, what we seem to hear is, in my estimation, is a clash of ideology. In Canada, they want to talk about various funds. For example, we have the Clean Growth Fund, with about approximately $15 billion that companies can apply for, may or may not get those in order to invest in technologies that are going to reduce carbon emissions. Whereas in the U.S., they've been very clear, and they have said there's going to be tax credits and production credits, which are easily calculatable, and you can determine exactly what you're going to get as a result of it. I'm going to ask all the panelists here today, what would you prefer in Canada? Would you prefer to apply to a fund through the Canadian government to get some money, or would you prefer to have what they've done in the United States, which is to have tax credits coupled with production credits? I'll turn it to Mr. Orr first.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think the production incentives are the missing piece of the Canadian picture. The capital supports, I don't want to say that they're not useful, but they, in the absence of that sort of operational component, the production piece, they're not as efficient, I think, as what could be achieved with the suite of tools that could be developed with the capital investment tax credits and something like a market surety mechanism, especially in the case of CCUS, where you're capturing a commodity that doesn't have any market value, that is predictable in the way that investors need.
Ms. Green?
I would say that there are RNG projects being supported by the government through grants, but they are on a project-by-project basis. And likewise, I don't see this as being a very efficient process, and it really doesn't help the producers of biogas and RNG make investment decisions. That market surety and that market certainty is an important element, and so an ITC and a PTC would be an absolute preference for our members. As well, with the programs that tend to be one-off, they take a very long time to go through that process. So ultimately, that certainty of market conditions is what would be best for our industry.
Turn it over to our other witnesses now.
San, I'll jump in here now. I think I agree with what the first two panelists have said, or witnesses have said, that really the tax credits and the production support structures are really very important to define the return on investment on these projects so that they can move forward and attract investment. I would add, though, that in this situation, most of the companies, or all the companies we work with, are earlier stage companies, and access to capital is a significant challenge for them. And when you're trying to build larger, expensive facilities that could be in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars to build, access to capital for early stage companies is a huge challenge. And the opportunity to obtain some funds through things like the Canada Growth Fund are important to that sector as well. But the access to funds through the Canada Growth Fund are not sufficient. There does need to be a very clear, there needs to be clarity in what the return on investment will be, and that's better defined, or can be defined, through tax credits and production credits.
Mr. Robertson?
I was part of the team when we negotiated the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement that was trying to arrive at a subsidies code whereby Canada and the United States would agree on how we would provide incentives. We were not successful. We punted it to what is now the World Trade Organization. We've been, the holy grail has been trying to get a subsidies code. That would be the ideal, because we do have a free trade agreement with the United States and with Mexico. And if we could agree on a kind of continental basis how we're going to manage incentives and subsidies, because we are now moving to that era, as I say, of industrial policy for the reasons I've enumerated, that would be the ideal. And if we did that, I think that would open up the door with Europe as well. We have a free trade agreement with Europe, and if we could do that, again, under Article 24, which provides when you have a free trade pact, you can come up with a subsidies code. That would work well with the Europeans, who could perhaps pick in with the US. And then we also have, of course, the free trade agreement now in across the Trans-Pacific through the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. The danger that we're talking about is that we get involved in a gigantic subsidies war, which is already taking place. That's why we saw the Europeans in Washington last week, because they're worried what's going on. It would be best, particularly amongst the democracies with whom we have free trade agreements, if we could come up with a agreement on how we're going to manage subsidies and incentives, because ultimately what we're trying to do is strengthen the democracies in what is seen to be an existential fight with autocracies.
Mr. Auer, you said, to unlock trillions in private capital, and that really is going to be the solution to this transition, is unlocking the trillions in private capital. I'm going to run out of time, so what's better to unlock that private capital, a government program or tax credits and production credits?
Well, I'm not sure I fully understand the distinction between those in terms of the fact that they're all sort of government programs. They're all
a program that you have to apply for.
Yeah,
and maybe or maybe not get some funding. As one witness here said, you might be on the naughty or the nice list, and so you get it or don't get it.
Right. Well, I think the challenge for, at least in my sector, is that the types of projects that we're looking at are first commercialization applications. So CCUS has never been applied at scale at a cement facility yet around the world. There are a number of projects, including the two I mentioned in Canada, that are moving in that direction. But they present unique challenges because they've never been done before. And so I would go back to my original comments that all of those options, the capital supports, the investment tax credits, and the production incentives, can play an important role in getting those first commercialization technologies across the finish line. But the balance between them can really determine the outcome. So one thing that we believe is that the de-risking the operational costs through something like a carbon contracts for difference or the types of incentives that exist in the IRA reduces the upfront capital risks and therefore the upfront capital supports that are required. So
thank you
in
very
theory,
much.
yes, it's a more efficient approach.
Thank you, Mr. Auer, for your comments. Mr. Aria, please, for 6 minutes.
I would like to address my first question to Mr. Colin Robertson. Mr. Robertson, I'm glad to hear, I think you have mentioned industrial policy 3 times or maybe 4 times. I rarely hear that because I've been talking that we need to have an industrial policy statement for the country. This IRA is obviously one of the most significant legislation that has come in the U.S. For the manufacturing sector and the economy in general. When we take this piece of legislation along with the CHIPS and Science Act, the $280 billion, where $200 billion goes for setting up of 20 technology centers, focusing on semiconductors, energy transition, biotechnology, which some of the experts in the U.S. are calling once in a generation opportunity or once in a lifetime change that U.S. has made in terms of the industrial policy. I'm glad you also mentioned the continental industrial policy, but before that, we talk about the various strategies. For example, we recently announced the critical minerals strategy. When it comes to new technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, genomics, we talk big. We said that we want to be at the forefront of every new technology, which ideally is good. But whether it is possible or not, I am not sure. Do you think we need to have a Canada industrial policy?
Yes, sir, I think we do. I think that the United States has moved to an industrial strategy. The Europeans are moving in that direction. I think Australia is. I think we should do it as well. But I would try and do it in tandem with our largest trading partners, and that would start on a continental basis, because the United States is very much under the Biden administration going down that road. And I have no doubt that that if there is another administration after Mr. Biden, whether it be Republican or Democrat, that they'll take the same approach. I think that we have re-embraced industrial strategy, and we should look to see how others are doing it. Just as in regulatory reform between Canada and the United States, we've set up a commission which basically assures that we're keeping what we call the minutiae of small differences from upsetting that relationship, because again, so much of our trade is with the United States. So I think in the case of industrial strategy and incentives, that we should be looking at this together, because together we'd have a much more successful platform. And I would endorse your point about finding the sectors where we really are in the lead. You know, we're not good at everything, but we are good at some very good things, and we should really focus on our areas of competitive advantage. And as I said, there's a number of studies which have identified these areas. I pointed to the Monique Leroux report, for example. I think that's where it would be a good starting point. Again, a lot of the work has been done within Canada.
You know, you mentioned we have to look at the sectors where we have some advantage. If we consider that we have an advantage in the steel sector and aluminum sector, the fact has been, I mean, I'm just taking them as an example. I'm not very sure that we have the advantage there, but assuming that we have advantage in steel and aluminum sectors, if you look at the last 15 to 20 years, hardly any new capacity has been added in these industries. All the companies in Canada, they are all foreign owned. They have become the branch office of big multinational companies. 90% of their exports go to United States. We have free trade agreement with Europe, with Asia Pacific region. We have got free trade agreement all across the world, but no exports are being done from Canada. Again, taking the examples of steel and aluminum, because the foreign ownership actually hinders development of certain sectors in Canada. Your thoughts on that?
Mr. Robertson, how do you get his attention?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Please start again. You're muted. You're muted again, sir. There.
Is that better?
That's
Chair?
better. Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Please start again.
Sir, Chair, we've always sought to attract foreign investment in Canada because we don't have a big enough market for the investment we need to develop our economy. And it has worked extremely well for our economy, beginning with railways, pipelines, grids. So and we are also now big investors, particularly through our pension funds. But I think investment will go where it wishes, but we want to make ourselves as attractive as possible. And I think we are an attractive destination point, and this has been shared by all governments. So I would continue to attract foreign investment to Canada. And the point that some of the big companies export so much of what they produce to the United States, well, that's actually a good thing. It shows that we're actually scaling up to market size. And that's what we seek to achieve.
My point is that we are just maintaining it for the last 15, 20 years. We are not growing. Anyway, with my limited time, I just want to say that the term you use, the permanent campaign, a Team Canada approach, that is something barely, I've been in politics just for about 7 years. I do understand that, and I do understand the importance of that in the international trade, vis-a-vis the US and obviously North America in general. Do you think we need to, I don't want to suggest another task force or another team or another department. How do we keep this, how to keep focus on this permanent campaign you mentioned?
If we can get a brief answer.
Yes, in my experience, it starts in the Prime Minister's office, and both under Mr. Harper and under Mr. Trudeau, having a dedicated team in the Prime Minister's office, which then worked with the Prime Privy Council office and bureaucracy, it worked extremely well.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Bonjour, merci.
Hello, and thank you to all the witnesses, and I acknowledge the chair and my colleagues in the room as well. I'd like to ask each of you, a number of witnesses over the course of our last meetings on this topic have talked to us about fearing flight of capital towards the U.S., so relocation of investments. Is this a fear that you share as well? And how can we avoid this flight of capital to our neighbor in the south? Madam Chair, I'll let you decide who starts first.
Would you like to start? Mr. Marshall, would you like to start then?
My apologies. I missed that. I would say my biggest concern here is if flight of capital is a fear and a concern. I think the biggest problem we have is attraction of capital, and the fact that we need international capital to be coming into Canada, and with these. If we don't have the right environment for that, we won't be able to attract the capital, let alone hold what we have here already. I think we've talked about what are the incentives or approaches we can take to attract this capital, and it really comes to creating the economic environment where these companies can be successful. Subsidies become subsidies and tax credits and these sorts of tools become part of that. And as other witnesses have stated already, these are all factored into the business cases for all of these projects, and the projects will be built where the economics provide the best opportunity for success. Thank you.
Mr. Robertson, did you want to speak on that comment from Mr. Savard-Tremblay?
Vous êtes sur muet, Monsieur Robertson.
You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Robertson. There you are.
Pardon me, Chair. I'd just say an industrial strategy is where I think we should be headed.
Ah bon, vous pouvez continuer le tour.
You can continue on, asking the others if they'd like to answer.
I would say that given the current conditions that we're in with the IRA presenting a very different playing field for Canadian companies, that threat is very real in terms of the member companies being able to take their manufacturing, their skill sets, and their jobs south of the border. And one of the differentiators between the IRA and what Canada has presented in the Fall Economic Statement, as I mentioned, is that there has been a specific call out for biogas and RNG for inclusion in those production and incentive tax credits. With the complete lack of mention of biogas and RNG in the Fall Economic Statement here in Canada, Canada is missing a tool in its toolbox.
Yeah, I mean, I support the sort of macro view that we need an industrial decarbonization policy. I mean, the problem that the IRA is trying to solve is that the market is not ready to pay for the value of the carbon reductions that come from the types of technologies that are being supported through the IRA. We could make net zero cement, for example, today with carbon capture and storage, but the market would not pay for the increased cost of that cement at a magnitude that would be capable of justifying the investment. And so there are a number of things that we could do to close that gap. I think the production subsidies that the IRA introduces are certainly one powerful mechanism. Another mechanism would be procurement. You know, governments can play a leading role in helping to procure these lower carbon goods that are made with these technologies, and therefore start to incubate a sustainable market response. Thank you. Yeah.
Merci pour l'ensemble de vos réponses.
Thank you for all of your answers. Mr. Robertson, you talked about an industrial strategy as a response to the IRA. It was announced that the government was preparing its response. There would be an industrial policy that would be announced in the 2023 budget. The Minister of Industry announced last week that there would be a battery policy. Would you like to comment on how we could sort of flesh this out?
Well, I think we decide on what it is we want, And this is our advantage, of course, is in our strategic minerals. But our strategic minerals, for now, we send them for processing to China. I think we've got to start with refinery and using clean tech methods within Canada, but that's going to take some time. It's also going to take substantial investment. And that's where I think, again, if we did it on a continental basis or with free trade partners in Europe, the Europeans are very interested in what we have, that we would be able to track the investment. And that would be one of those areas I'm talking about where we really do have the competence and we have the capacity, as of course we have the resources. But it is going to take an effort bigger than Canada, where we are going to need investment and technology from our partners in the United States and in Europe. And so I think that is one area that I would hope that the government in their industrial policy will be looking at, because again, we have a natural advantage. What I would not like to see would be those vital minerals transferred to the United States for a refinery or some other place, because the technology and the jobs that could be created from going to higher end is really what we want to try and preserve in Canada today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and thank all the witnesses here before us today. I'm going to start with Ms. Green and talking about renewable natural gas. I have a renewable natural gas project that's just underway in my riding in Fruitvale. Ren Energy is building a plant there. They just got their final development permit, I believe, today or yesterday. I'm just wondering if you could comment on really what drives those kind of investments. You know, this project obviously has been planned long before IRA was even conceived of, probably. And just if you could comment perhaps on what drives those decisions, the price of natural gas. I don't pretend to understand energy markets, and it seems right now the price of natural gas is very different in different markets, and one of those lines is along the border of the U.S. And I just want to find out, I guess, how much these decisions the federal government makes, any subsidies, you know, how much that would change things. Would these things go ahead anyways?
Thank you for your question. The current drivers in Canada are very much a patchwork. We have many provinces taking the lead right now, establishing specific mandates for a percentage of renewable gas as part of their delivery of natural gas to customers. And we have seen leading jurisdictions in Quebec and British Columbia that have established that type of a policy. Currently in Canada, we don't have anything federally of that nature, but there is, as we know, to move towards as many emission reduction tons as we can, a real desire to see a targeted policy that can look to reduce the emissions for low carbon, to include low carbon gaseous fuels. Biogas and RNG projects have been established across the country, where there have been programs that have specifically identified their opportunity and eligibility, and where there are not, we see that there are less development. Many of these projects take between 2 to 5 years from initial feasibility to the approvals and construction process to the project that you were speaking to. And so this is a significant amount of time. The point being that they don't happen overnight. So when we see changes in policy like we have seen in the IRA, this is definitely game-changing for projects that are already in that cycle and have investigated the opportunities for investment in Canada. So it not only disrupts the opportunity for future growth, but for projects that have already made those commitments. So it's a substantive impact.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'll turn to Mr. Auer. It's good to see you as always. I just want to get a better sense of the cement production in Canada. We all know, like, every community has a ready mix kind of operation that creates the concrete we need. But how many places is cement built? I'm thinking of, the CCUS demands you were thinking of, how many of those kind of plants would we need to produce in Canada to cover that production of cement?
So yeah, we like to say concrete is hyper-local, cement is more regional based. We have 15 production facilities across the country, 2 in British Columbia, 2 in Alberta, 5 in Ontario, 4 in Quebec, 4 members in Quebec, and 1 in Nova Scotia. And geography does play a role in the viability of the technology as it stands today. Both of the projects that have attracted investment to date in Canada are in Alberta, and I think there's a couple of obvious reasons for that. One is there's some infrastructure to transport captured CO2 that's already been invested in, and of course they have 1,000 years worth of geologic storage in that province. And so part of the challenge will be for the cement sector and other heavy industries is how to overcome some of the existing geographical and geological challenges on the storage side to make that technology applicable in every region in Canada and around the world. And there's lots of promising stuff happening in that vein. But it does sort of point again to Mr. Robertson's comments about collaboration with other jurisdictions. There are the United States making deep investments, not just in the actual capture infrastructure, but also all the infrastructure, the ecosystem, if you will, that's required to make CCUS work. And there are opportunities for partnerships that would, I think, open the door for broader and earlier application of CCUS across the country for our sector.
How much?
33 seconds remaining.
Okay, quickly then, Mr. Auer, what's the export situation for Canadian cement into the United States and vice versa? Just what's the competition?
About 40% of our cement is exported to the United States. So Canada has enough capacity to meet its own demands, and the U.S. does not. They import quite a bit of their cement, and 30% of the U.S. imports come from Canada.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. Essentially, this is our last session of examination on the Inflation Reduction Act, and many have described it as a game changer. And those are just not my words. I mean, they include those of, for example, Elizabeth Kwan of the Canadian Labour Congress, who've indicated its huge impact that it's going to have. And I just want to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Seaback's line of questioning about the IRA and notion of it providing certainty. You know what the rules are. You know what exactly about the tax credits, the production credits, so you can actually figure out the competitive advantage to invest in the United States. Now, Ms. Green, you've even indicated it provides certainty, a competitive edge. Mr. Marshall, you mentioned lacking a stronger response. It's almost going to be impossible for Canada to compete. So my first kind of questioning would go to Ms. Marshall, Ms. Green, excuse me, if I could. You indicated projects being on hold from August, the exclusion from the investment tax credit from the fall economic statement being a mistake, and the clean, for example, you see situations in that whole notion of the difference between the IRA and what we do in Canada. I mean, the Clean Fuel Fund, the $1.5 billion announcement from the government, that was made in June of 2021, but it took 18 months, November 2022, for the government to make its initial round of questioning. Initial round of announcements. And even then, we still need to negotiate agreements to be put in place. I mean, we already know what the rules are in place. You've already talked about projects being on hold. CBC had a story the other day about Ottawa preparing to go toe-to-toe with the U.S. to subsidize EV battery production in Canada. And one of the comments that was made by and I'll read that, it just says, a consultant works on the green economy in Canada said several companies are now calculating subsidies that may be available in the United States. Even a company that already has promised to invest in Canada is reassessing the situation in light of the Inflation Reduction Act. So my question is, what do we need to do to compete now to keep those dollars in Canada, to keep those investments in RNG projects here in my riding, for example, in Southern Ontario? I mean, just in 2020, General Motors did a $28 million project with methane gas. with our local landfill company, Walker's Industries. It produces 35% of their power. It actually produces heat for the plant and reduces their GHG emissions. So what it is that we need to do right now so that we can compete and keep that investment in Canada? First to Ms. Green.
The time is now. There is no time to waste. And when we look at the conditions that have been set up in the IRA, Canada has experience with investment tax credits, as they have been able to look at eligible clean technologies in accelerated depreciation elements. So there are measures that Canada is familiar with. Biogas and RNG are identified in these measures. So implementing an investment and production tax credit here in Canada now to be able to avoid the movement of manufacturing and expertise to the U.S. Is critical. Our members see that. They're taking a pause and evaluating what the landscape looks like. But the time is now for Canada to move into putting in place these investments that can be competitive here.
Can we wait until the budget in March of 2022, or do those decisions have to be made by the federal government now? Like you've said, there's projects on hold, they're on pause. What's to stop those investors from just saying, you know what, the climate is better in the United States right now?
I can only reiterate that the members are calculating their options. The sooner that Canada can move forward with these measures to provide conditions of success for Canada, the better.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a line of questioning to
42 seconds.
To Mr. Auer. And so one of the core elements of the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act is an expansion of their tax credit called 45Q for CCUS projects. The investment tax credit for those type of projects here is currently proposed by Finance Canada. Does it go far enough to support projects in your industry?
By itself, it's not enough. But in combination with some of the other financing mechanisms that were announced for the Canada Growth Fund, for example, it could be enough. The trick is they need to be implemented, as you suggest, quickly so that we can have certainty about how both that investment tax credit for CCUS and how the Canada Growth Fund will operate in a way that provides that investor confidence.
And we still have no certainty on what the details are of the Canada Growth Fund.
Nelly, Mr. Auer, thank you very much. On to Mr. Miao for 5 minutes, please.
Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your appearance today at the Standing Committee. First, I'd like to, through the Chair, direct my question to Mr. Auer. I was very pleased to see the work your association had done for the roadmap to net zero carbon concrete by 2050. And my question is, how can achieving net zero carbon concrete help position Canada as a global leader in concrete exports, and where do you currently see the most potential low-carbon concrete exports to?
Thank you for your question. So concrete is not typically exported. It's the cement that is used to make the concrete that has the export potential, as well as the technologies around the decarbonization of cement and concrete that would have that export potential. Concrete is very heavy, very expensive to ship, and typically it's, as Mr. Canning's referenced before, it tends to be quite local because it has a sort of shelf life. Once it's mixed, it's got to be used relatively quickly and within a short truck trip, if you will, to the project. So the opportunity is really twofold. One, Canada exports quite a bit of cement and cement products to the United States as the United States moves very rapidly to decarbonize, and as they integrate provisions like Buy Clean policies into how they determine how they're going to use building materials like cement and concrete. We need to be cognizant of that and stay at least in step with those decarbonization achievements in the United States if we want to maintain those markets. Of course, the other big opportunity is that the technologies like CCUS, as they are successfully applied in a heavy manufacturing facilities like a cement producer, those technologies, there are economies of scale. There's economies that come from the learning. Those technologies will become less expensive, deployable by other cement facilities and other industries, and ultimately into other facilities that operate in other markets.
Thank you very much. And the next question I'd like to direct to Mrs. Green. through the chair. In British Columbia, Canadian Biogas currently has a number of projects, both upcoming and ongoing. Could you share with the committee about these projects and what sorts of potential do you see for future RNG projects in British Columbia?
Thank you. As I mentioned, British Columbia has been a leader in being able to promote biogas and renewable natural gas. The projects that they have currently in operation span from agricultural projects to municipal projects looking at wastewater and landfills. And so there's quite a variety of supply and diversification of projects in British Columbia. Again, the driver in BC has been their alignment of energy and climate policy, predominantly driven by their Clean BC plan. And within that, they've had some very forward-thinking considerations for looking at how to implement renewable gases as part of their supply to hitting those low-carbon targets. So British Columbia has definitely been a leader in this space across Canada.
Great, thank you, Ms. Green. And next question I'd like to direct to Mr. Marshall. I understand that BIC has signed a number of MOUs with companies around the world in countries like Italy or Belgium. Could you tell the committee a bit more about these MOUs and the benefit they provide, and how can they help to build a stronger bioeconomy at home and internationally?
Yes, as you've mentioned, thank you for the question. As you mentioned, we have a number of MOUs with organizations around the world, particularly with Europe. What these MOUs do is help us develop relationships with those organizations who are like-minded, who are focused on developing early stage companies and technologies within the industrial bioeconomy. And by working with these groups, we've been able to attract interest for projects coming to Canada from Europe. And we've also been able to work with our companies in Canada and give them opportunities to connect into Europe. So the prime benefit here is to build a bigger network so that we can support early stage companies and help them commercialize and grow wherever it is best for them to commercialize and grow. So that's really the strength of those MOUs. We also have a number of MOUs across Canada. We're working with organizations, economic development organizations now currently in Quebec with in the Trois-Rivières-Baie-Cancour region, which is a very similar region to our cluster region in Sarnia-Lambton, a very traditional chemical region, which has the opportunity to be a real cluster anchor for the development of the industrial bioeconomy. This allows us to accelerate these technologies forward. However, there's only so much we can do with our resources and small investment funds. And that's why it's very important that we have a number of these tools that have been discussed today and having them available for moving these early stage companies and technologies forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marshall. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Monsieur Robertson, pour faire suite à votre dernier
Mr. Robinson, to follow up on what you said before, that you said we have to avoid the flight of critical minerals to the U.S., how would you describe the relationship that we have with the United States on this issue? Because it seems to be quite conflictual. There's this agreement between the two governments, that of Canada and President Biden, to ensure independence when it comes to electric batteries. But at the same time, there are these policies like the Inflation Reduction Act and the former bill on infrastructure, where there was an incentive for assembled vehicles. Luckily, there was a change from U.S. to North American for the incentives. How should we now deal with our American partner? As a partner? As a partner. Please explain.
Chair, yes, we should deal with the United States as a partner. We have preferred access to the United States. We have, as you have noted, a whole series of entrees in the United States, the best entrees of any country in the world. We, in fact, are in an envious position, although we don't always feel that sometimes because, as I pointed out in my testimony, we are often collateral damage to American actions aimed at another country, more recently China, for example, in the case of steel and aluminum tariffs. So I do think that my argument is that for us, it's a daily permanent campaign involving not just our embassy, but also members of this committee going down to see their counterparts, because when we make the case for Canada with our counterparts in the United States, most of the time we are successful. Again, the business of America is business, but they like us and they also understand, and we can make a compelling case as to why when we do things in a kind of mutually beneficial basis, and I use the word reciprocity by for good reason, because Americans aren't free traders, but they do understand the principle of reciprocity, and that's what we've basically managed to do over the past 40 years. And with these agreements, to go back to my point, these are based on the premise of partnership. And I would just say to the member that the provinces which has taken often the lead in this has been Quebec, quite successfully, with the success of premiers going down and working the United States market.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to turn to Mr. Auer, and we often hear in this place about how industry just needs certainty, and a couple of times you've mentioned carbon contracts for difference, and I think one of the things that concept would bring is certainty to industry, and I just wonder if you could expand on that with regards to the cement industry, and perhaps also talk about border adjustments when we have Canadian companies that are paying a carbon tax and American companies that aren't.
Two very big questions. Yeah. Well, carbon contracts for difference are effectively a form of production subsidy. It guarantees that the value of, for example, the carbon sequestered from a carbon capture project will be backstopped by the government. So in Canada, we have a carbon pricing system, obviously, and that, presuming that system has longevity into the future, and the price increases as predictive, will create a certain value for that carbon. But that carbon is not really known, because it's not just the regulated price; it's the voluntary markets, the credit markets, that also determine the value of that carbon as a tradable commodity. And so a carbon contract for difference would eliminate that uncertainty by having the government, as the holder of the contract, guarantee that if the market does not deliver the value, a certain strike value that's required to make a project investable, they will provide the shortfall. Conversely, if the market outperforms, government could end up actually receiving money, depending on the structure of the contract. So effectively, it allows investors to do what they can now do in the United States, which is calculate the return on investment for any given project in that space. On the border carbon adjustment piece, I think ultimately we are going to get to a point where that becomes a necessary and important tool. I understand that the EU, after much negotiation, has finally agreed to a border carbon adjustment for a limited number of material or commodities, including cement. And certainly, we see it as one of the potentially important tools when it comes to protecting the competitiveness of our sector from imports from jurisdictions that don't have similar carbon pricing pressures.
Thank you very much, Mr. Auer. On to Mr. Martel for 5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci à tous les témoins ici présents.
Thank you to all the witnesses. I'll start with Mr. Robinson. Personally, I'm pushing so that phosphate, I'm talking about critical metals here. Of course, I'm pushing so that phosphate be added to the list of critical metals, especially when it comes to batteries, LFP batteries. The Resources Department is telling me that the list is revised every 2 or 3 years by officials and that nothing can be done before then. It's not a lack of leadership. Is it not a lack of leadership or flexibility, according to you, Mr. Robertson? What do you think?
You're on mute, Mr. Robertson. Thank you.
Chair, I'm not familiar with how the list is devised, but 2 or 3 years would seem rather extreme, sir. I think that, again, pressure from parliamentarians usually has an effect on bureaucrats who may have a means of doing things. But in my experience, they respond appropriately so to elected representatives making the case.
Alors, la prochaine question pour Madame Green.
The next question is for Ms. Green. When the update was published for the economic fall statement, now it was said that it was a step in the right direction, but there's still a significant gap that needs to be dealt with when it comes to the IRA. From your point of view, what is lacking in Canada to make up for this shortfall with the IRA, and that would also attract foreign investors to come here?
Thank you for your question, Madam Chair. I think as I had mentioned in the fall economic statement, the oversight of biogas and RNG as part of the suite of clean technologies in the ITC and the investment tax credit was significant for our members, was noticed, and we had received a lot of feedback from that. Generally, I think for Canada to be able to, as has been mentioned already before, to step forward with a response that looks at similar measures from an investment or a production tax credit, to do those as soon as possible, creating those conditions, as we've heard throughout today, that can make the North American market an attractive market for investment, where we can be able to see some commonality in our support for clean technologies, I think is a very positive one. If we don't have alignment, then I think for any foreign investment, that creates, again, more of a patch-like approach and more confusion.
C'est intéressant ce que vous dites, mais aussi, Madame Green.
That's interesting, but Ms. Green, you're also saying that time is not on our side for dealing with the deficit created by the IRA. How is it that Canada is so behind? We're always, falling behind our neighbor. We hear it's never too late. But my question is it too late now? Is there something that can still be done about this fact?
I think that the very discussion that we're having as part of this study is a testament to the interest of this group, and I think that it is never too late. There will be investments that are looking at where they can best be placed for our biogas and RNG projects. So I believe that it is a very much a dichotomy right now. We need to move quickly to be able to provide provisions that can attract investment here in Canada as much as we can.
Encore une fois, oui, very short.
Once again, very short. Oh my goodness, I won't be able to do it in a short time period. How many seconds do I have? It's impossible. 35 seconds. Ms. Green, you appeared before the committee on November 18th of 2022. The representatives of Portland Corporation highlighted that currently, in comparison to the U.S., Canadian producers of biofuel and low-carbon producers are disadvantaged competitively because of the incentives by both countries, and it is estimated that Canada does not have comparable incentives. What impact could the IRA have on Canadian producers of these fuels?
Mr. Martel, now I have no time to answer. If we can possibly get a very brief answer from...
I'd be happy to provide a follow-up to the committee to accommodate.
Thank you very much. We will appreciate that. Ms. Dillon, for 5 minutes, please.
Our witnesses for being here. I'll start with you, Mr. Orr. With both domestic and global use of concrete and cement continuing to increase rapidly, what steps are the Cement Association of Canada taking to ensure that you can continue to meet production needs, and how do you think our government could help you in doing so?
Thank you for the question. We have already put in place a unique collaboration with government or the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development to develop a roadmap about to net zero, which is, I think, as you're suggesting, a critical step to maintain the competitiveness in our sector in a global economy that is rapidly decarbonizing and rapidly putting significant scrutiny on heavy emitting sectors such as ours. So I think it's the tools that we're talking about today that will attract that foreign investment into our industry in Canada that are going to play the sort of critical role in positioning our sector here in Canada to continue to thrive.
Perfect. Thank you. My next question is for Madam Green. How can renewable gas play a role in sectors such as industry and freight, which are typically considered more difficult to decarbonize?
Thank you for the question. Biogas and renewable natural gas provide a multifaceted use as an energy source and fuel. It's currently being used as a form of transportation fuel, as a drop-in transportation fuel for those fleets that have converted from diesel to compressed natural gas. In the industrial sector, we do also see a play for renewable natural gas to be able to be used as a feedstock per se in those industrial processes. So in that way, we're seeing opportunities for decarbonization of industrial processes by use of RNG.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And my next question is for Mr. Robertson. On the topic of the U.S. midterm elections, how could the midterm election results affect President Biden's ability to introduce bills similar to the IRA? And do you anticipate this is something he could do?
Well, it's going to be more difficult now with the House in Republican hands, because I think you're going to see the Republicans launch a series of investigations into things like Hunter Biden, the retreat from Afghanistan. I don't think they have any interest in giving President Biden any more legislative achievements as you move towards 2024, because effectively that campaign has begun, as we've seen with former President Trump making his declaration. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the administration to achieve new big legislative packages. Not impossible, but difficult.
Do you believe we could do to, I don't know, help alleviate that situation or facilitate it in any way?
Well, it's our interests are always to basically prevent actions which could do harm to Canada, and a lack of legislative actions probably means we end up the status quo. But it does not reduce my my argument that we should be every day making the case, including members of Parliament going down to Washington and seeing their counterparts, as to why Canada and the United States working together is a much more effective partnership than the U.S. taking actions which cause Canadians, whether they intended or not, harm.
For that, and would you like to add anything, Mr. Oyer or Madam Green?
Not at this time, no.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carey. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would like to get some comments on preferences. I'm just going to give an example here. In June 21st, 2021, Minister O'Regan launched a call for proposals under a $1.5 billion Clean Fuels Fund. Minister Wilkinson announced the recipients, or some of the recipients, potential recipients, in November 14th, 2022. So just for this program, somebody applies to it, they get a positive response 16 months later, they still have to negotiate contracts. And I'm very, very concerned about the delays in Canada's response to the IRA. In my riding, or Durham region, we have St. Mary's Cement, great company, great employer. These companies, and as you know, your members, they're international. They can do their work anywhere. And American firms are already, because of the certainty in the United States, they're already ordering the big equipment in order to make these projects. And the concern with supply chains around the world, if we don't get our act together, and if we're waiting until the budget, okay, in maybe April, we had a great opportunity in November to give certainty. We are up against the biggest, I think, competitive disadvantage we've ever seen. So these comments, like Mr. Robinson said, get our own act together. We've heard stop the self-inflicted wounds with the naughty and nice list that the government tends to have. Maybe, Mr. Orr, if you could just explain what would be a reasonable response, like right now, that the Canadian government could message out to industry as a response to this IRA. How quickly should we put it in place? And what do you see as a suite of policy instruments that we should be considering right now? Because my concern is the decisions are being made now. There's shovels in the ground in the United States, and if we're waiting another 3 or 4 or 5 months to get this certainty out, if it's in the budget in the spring, we're just going to be losing probably the greatest potential investments, generational investments that we ever could have. Could you give us an idea of what we need to do now?
Well, I think we, first of all, thank you for the question. I think we have the right suite of instruments on the table, but you're absolutely right. It needs to happen very quickly, and I think it needs to happen with a level of ambition that matches what the U.S. has done with the IRA. You know, Canada, I think, has a perennial problem around ambition. This is not a new thing that we've faced here in Canada. We're often very good at getting things started. You know, excellent R&D. You know, in both in the decarbonization space, but also in healthcare and all sorts of other fields. But we've always really struggled with that leap from taking that knowledge and that expertise and commercializing it to our own economic advantage. And I think that's certainly what's at stake in the low carbon space. As an industry, we will get to net zero by 2050. That is our global commitment. The question is, how much of a slice of the technology pie will we develop here in Canada, and will we do it first, or will we lead, or will we follow? So that, I think that's what's ultimately at stake, and speed and ambition are key if we want to lead.
Well, I think the concern, as you mentioned in your opening statement, with your industry in Canada, it's 1.5% of carbon emissions, but globally it's 7%. So your industry has already done a lot, and talking to stakeholders and understanding with the competitive situation here in Canada, we need to send that message out sooner than later. As MP Dillon mentioned, the changes in the United States, if I'm a company and I have to make these decisions, I know what I have right now, the certainty in the United States. In Canada, we don't have that certainty. Ms. Green, are you able to tell us as parliamentarians what can we do to help the government send signals to industry that, you know, we are a good place to still do business? What can we tell industry that, you know, don't make these decisions now? Give us a little bit of time to make sure we have that competitive opportunities here in Canada.
Thank you for the question, and I believe that there have been commitments that were made in Budget 2022 that preceded both the IRA and the Fall Economic Statement, and I think that making whole on those commitments and ensuring that we run to the end of the calendar year with some reflection on those pieces. The Canada Growth Fund, for example, while another program, specific details that are still unclear with respect to the elements of that program could be provided. And I think that being able to take lessons from other programs, which you've mentioned, that have taken quite a lengthy time, to when we move forward with the Canada Growth Fund, to not repeat those mistakes and to make those future programs as efficient as possible. So I think there is still time to be able to advance and make clarity for the industry and for investment in Canada.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. All right, on to Mr. Varani for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to start with Mr. Auer. So first of all, I want to say thank you to you for your you and your organization's participation in the roadmap to net zero carbon concrete by 2050. It's an important initiative. I'm going to pick up. You were having a discussion with Mr. Cannings about things such as carbon border adjustments, for example, and you mentioned issues about ensuring that entities such as yours or industries such as yours are protected from potential competition from jurisdictions where there isn't a carbon price, for example. So I wanted to just elicit some of your response to the notion of, one is the broad issue about a carbon price actually being an economic lever that's designed to actually spur innovation, because if you don't act to reduce the amount of your carbon footprint, there's a financial hit. But two, also about the output-based pricing mechanism, which is a sensitive aspect of the carbon price that I feel not a lot of Canadians fully understand, but it's meant to protect industries such as yours that are trade exposed, that operate at large volumes, from a straightforward application of the carbon price. It's calibrated based on the amount of business you're doing overseas. So if you comment on those two aspects of the carbon price, please.
Sure. Thank you for that question. Yes, the cement sector, as you suggest, is an emission-intensive, trade-exposed sector. In fact, it's in the federal analyses, it's consistently been the top 3 most emissions-intensive, trade-exposed sector. So there is a recognition that our industry is uniquely exposed to the potential downside risks of costs like a carbon tax if our competing markets don't bear the same costs. And so the output-based pricing system and all the provincial equivalents except for the system in British Columbia have provisions to provide a certain measure of protection to industries such as ours. And we believe that in those output-based systems, which, as I said, exist everywhere except for in British Columbia, that we've struck a pretty good balance in the sort of short term, if you will. The challenge becomes, we're now entering the next compliance period under the federal system, and by extension the provincial systems, and so there's upward pressure on the price and downward pressure on the benchmarks that we have to meet. So at a certain point, if industries are no longer able to stay ahead of what their compliance obligations are under a carbon pricing regime, those competitiveness risks will start to come to bear, if you will. And so, the relationship between that and the IRA, of course, is, as an industry, we want to stay far ahead of that curve as we possibly can. There are transformative technologies that will be required to get us to net zero and ultimately to make good on the incentive provided by carbon pricing and other measures. And the Inflation Reduction Act effectively makes those transformative investments more attractive in the U.S. right now.
Thanks. I'm going to direct my next question to Mr. Robertson, actually. There's been a lot of discussion from a number of members here about EV vehicles and about batteries, and not just about critical minerals coming out of the ground in Canada, but also being refined, processed, and turned into batteries here right in Canada. And people were asking you about sort of tax credits and other incentivizations. I was wondering, Mr. Robertson, could you comment on the lay of the land, not just at the federal level, but also at the provincial level? I, for one, have some concerns that significant tax credits have been removed at the provincial level, particularly in my home province of Ontario. What does that do in terms of diminishing demand for EV cars in provinces like Ontario, but also for the batteries that could be potentially produced in Canada for those cars? If you can comment on that, Mr. Robertson. Thank you.
Chair, we strive in Canada to make Canada a place where we have a competitive advantage. And we have the skilled workforce. There are many factors that go into deciding what you're going to do, of which the incentives are a piece of it, but not all. So I would say that, well, that is an important piece. What is in many ways more important is, have you got the resources there? Do you have the know-how to do it? Do you have the workforce to do it? And the investments we make in education and in worker training and in the technology to allow us to do these are just as important in many ways as the incentives for whatever. So there are many factors involved in what we're talking about, but we do have natural advantages in Canada, and they usually extend to our resources and our workforce.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Let's continue in this direction, Mr. Robertson. Earlier you were saying that, well, unfortunately we were out of time, you were saying that you would suggest that we continue discussions to get our American counterparts to understand, and that Canada should not be collateral damage of the war against China. However, when I observe other things, for example, tariffs on lumber or those that affect aluminum, in no way can that be seen as confusion, that Canada would just be a collateral damage in that case. So I get the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said earlier that the dynamic in the American Congress means that Biden is in an unfortunate situation. And unfortunately, I feel that their protectionism is kind of a partisan weapon. Have I read the situation correctly, in your opinion?
Chair, protectionism is shared by both parties. It used to be primarily in the Democratic Party, but with Mr. Trump, it is now extended into the Republican Party. So there are protectionists on both sides of the aisle. And for that reason, we have to make our case in the United States. Again, that Team Canada effort I talk about on a daily basis as to why the relationship with Canada works to their advantage. And that involves going in and meeting with each member of Congress and pointing out what Canadian investment, what Canadian trade does, because in most of those cases, we are their largest trading partner and we don't have money or votes, but we can talk jobs. We are creating an awful lot of jobs in the United States, and that is what gets you a hearing with members of Congress, and that usually convinces them to say, let's leave this relationship as is. But again, you've got to do that on a daily basis because the Americans don't appreciate that.
Alors, écoutez, en 20 secondes, je vais...
Well, in 20 seconds, I will just take the moment to thank you and all of the witnesses.
Okay, but tell the committee members that the House is just... That's it. Sorry. Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Is Mr. Marshall still with us, or is he? I just don't see him on the screen anymore.
Mr. Marshall has problems apparently with his internet connection that they've been trying to reconnect for the last 5 minutes or so.
Okay, then I'll turn to Mr. Robertson and ask him the same question. Mr. Marshall had mentioned that the IRA builds on other already existing programs in the United States. I just wanted to have someone perhaps expand on that. What other advantages were there before the IRA came in, and how Canada stacks up against those other programs?
Chair, the big legislative package that went before the IRA Act was, of course, the CHIPS and Science Act, which also has a lot of incentives, particularly targeted to encourage the development of a semiconductor industry in the United States with tangential other technological investments. I think this is a trend that we're going to see. So the IRA is not the last of these kinds of programs. And it may be one area on which Democrats and Republicans can agree. I said earlier that I don't think we're going to see big legislative achievements, but in the one area that the Republicans and Democrats are in agreement with, and that is how America is best able to counter China. And so if you can fashion legislation in that regard, which will include inevitably incentives, that is what we're going to see more of, and we should just be prepared for that. Again, as I pointed out, Americans have practiced protectionism since the founding of the Republic.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you that again. So if there are proposals in the United States that advance protectionism legislation, then that may be something that would go ahead.
Yes, sir. And you'll see this not just at the national level, but you also see states practicing it in what we kind of call Buy America. But again, underlining why, effectively going down and reminding Americans why they want to put a North in front of when they say Buy America. So Buy North America and include Canada and Mexico. And we've created this continental, remarkably effective continental platform. We have resources, we have investment, we have workforce, we have market. And that is a compelling argument, which very senior Americans on both sides of the aisle also accept. And again, it's a message we just have to keep delivering. And in my experience, most effectively delivered by politicians to politicians. As I was a diplomat in Washington and at our consulates, but when I had Canadian members of Parliament or Canadian legislators from the provinces come down, that was a very effective way because you you talk the same language, and you have an instant hearing with your American counterparts.
So, Mr. Roberts, certainly the committee travel is an important part of the comments that you're making in that relationship. So thank you for saying that. On to Mr. Seeback for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to go back to what Mr. Carey was briefly talking about, a program, the $1.5 billion Clean Fuels Fund, announced in June of 2021 for applications. The successful applicants were notified on November 14th, 2022. That's 17 months later. I just wanted to get a sense from people in business. We've heard so much about business wants certainty, especially with respect to what's going on in the IRA, because there's certainty in what they have. Would you consider a 17-month process to award some funds, something that business would say is certainty? Ms. Green, Mr. Auer?
You want to start?
I mean, depending on the scale of the project, obviously some due diligence is necessary and welcome. But that's we're not. My industry is not involved in that particular fund, but there are others like the Net Zero Accelerator. And yeah, so speed and administrative burden are important considerations in the certainty conversation, certainly.
Ms. Green?
I would simply add that the pace of doing business has to be well understood in terms of the development of these programs, and as they continue through their stages, we have had members that have been brought through some of these programs, and they have been delaying the projects on the ground.
So I have very little time. If the Canada Growth Fund that's been announced, right, with respect in response to an extent to the IRA, if it takes 17 months for an application to be processed, how damaging will that be for Canadian industries in the face of the IRA?
Madam Chair, my point being that we have lessons learned from existing programs that could not be that should be well understood and not brought forward into these new programs or new funds that are being created.
Thank you very much. Mr. Varani for 2 minutes.
Okay, Madam Chair, I just wanted to ask with respect to perhaps Mr. Robertson and if there's any other panelists that might want to chime in, but we've again been talking about the critical minerals component, and you'll be aware that Minister Wilkinson launched the critical minerals strategy just within the last sort of 7 to 10 days, et cetera. But the Fall Economic Statement, which we were just voting on a few days ago, Bill C-32, talked about the increase in the mineral exploration tax credit and that rate going from 15 to 30%. Is that an appropriate sort of baseline for that rate to be set at? Do you think there's room for further improvement in terms of harnessing exactly what we've been talking about, which is competing with the Chinas of the world in terms of the race for critical minerals, but then also capitalizing on not just extracting them, but also getting to the point where we're processing, refining, and even manufacturing batteries themselves here in Canada? So if I could start with Mr. Robertson, and then if anyone else wants to chime in. Thanks.
Chair, in terms of the specifics, I can't comment, but I can say that we constantly have to re-examine our competitive tax advantages within Canada, both involving the various levels of government, whether we're talking federal, provincial, or municipal.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses for that very valuable information. And we look forward to further discussions in 2023 on this important topic. Thank you all very much. We will suspend. We need to go in camera for committee business.
you.